So, you teach beginning readers. You've been using decodable books for a while now. You've seen what they can do. The question no longer is, should I be using them? But rather, am I using them in the best way possible? My name is Anna Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers, host of the Reach All Readers podcast, and creator of the Reach All Readers Plus membership. When it comes to using decodable texts with beginning readers, here are some mistakes to watch out for. Number 1, choosing poor quality books. Not all decodable books are created equal. And while it's decodable is, in my opinion, not enough reason to use it. I learned this firsthand in my first year of teaching first grades. The scripted phonics program I was required to use came with decodable texts that were, frankly, awful. They were boring, they had stilted language, they were small little black and white books that just weren't all that fun or interesting at all. We can do a lot better, especially now when new decodable book series are being published all the time. Here's what to look for. Make sure the books actually tell a story if they're fiction. And if they're nonfiction, make sure they actually give good information. I personally prefer decodable text with beautiful illustrations. There's nothing wrong with beautiful pictures in decodable text. We just don't want students to have to use the pictures to figure out the words. Those pictures can be really helpful in carrying a story for beginning decodable books, which don't have very many words at all. So I have a series of free decodable books on my website, and I have a custom illustrator, and I'm really happy that she works with me to do these pictures because otherwise it'd be really hard to tell a story with just a couple of words on a page. But even further along, those pictures can be a source of helping students make inferences or even learning more information or understanding what vocabulary words in the story actually mean. You also want to avoid decodable texts that have odd language structures. We want students to know that reading is supposed to make sense. So the way the words are included in the book need to match the way that we speak. I don't like it when creators use did, to make a past tense instead of just using an ed word and introducing that a little bit early. So we don't say he did jump, we say he jumped. And I don't think there's anything wrong with introducing that pattern earlier rather than teaching our students that reading has to sound weird or doesn't make sense. This is especially problematic with our English language learners. If they're reading odd syntax or structure, we're confusing them. Let's not do that to our students. Mistake number 2 is choosing a book that doesn't match your student's phonics knowledge just because it's decodable. So there's a whole series of decodable books, but they're written to be decodable based on what the student has been taught. So if a child has learned CVC words, they're probably not ready to read a decodable book that contains CVCE patterns or even other long vowel patterns. Stick with what you've taught them with the understanding there might be a couple of story words in there, and that's okay. Along with this is just my opinion. I think it's a mistake to hold so closely to your phonics scope and sequence that you're afraid to have words in there that students haven't been taught yet. It's okay to have a couple. You can pre-teach those. Don't let this dissuade you from using really high quality decodable text because there's a word or two in there that your students haven't been taught yet. It's okay to pre-teach the words and just teach those patterns very quickly as they're going so they can access the rest of the text and practice the phonics that you have taught them. Mistake number 3 is using decodable text for beginners alongside pattern predictable books. There's a difference between helping students be flexible in their decoding and having them memorize a text based on the pictures and the pattern. I learned this firsthand with my youngest. So by this time, I let go of balanced literacy. I was learning to understand structural literacy and the science of reading and what we know about how kids best learn to read. But I was still holding on to some of my old teaching habits or patterns. So when I had him read during his very first reading lesson with me, he knew all his letters and sounds, he had phonemic awareness, and I had him start with a very simple decodable text. I think it was called I Am Sam. I think that's by Flyleaf Publishers. And he worked through that whole book, he sounded out all the words, and then I pulled out a leveled pattern book, a predictable book, because that's always what I had done. I always taught with those pattern books, and I thought it was important for comprehension and fluency. But right away when he got started with that book, he couldn't sound out the words because they were much harder than the CVC pattern I taught him. And as he tried to sound out one of those first words, I don't even remember what it was, I said, "Oh no, you can't sound that out. Just look at the pic." And it was like a light bulb went over my head and I realized, what am I doing? I'm confusing him. Over here, I'm teaching him to sound out words and I'm giving him books that practice it. And over here, I'm telling him sounding out doesn't work. You have to use the picture. And so from that first day, I put away the pattern books. And in our phonics lessons, we only used decodable text. Now, he was a quick learner, Pretty soon after that, a few months in, he was reading other non-decodable text on his own, but I always used decodable text to practice the patterns that I taught him. Mistake number 4 is jumping into a book without a warm-up. So I recommend doing something like blending lines or having students read word lists or even playing a word reading game or doing whole class blending practice, a blending drill, before you have students jump into the decodable text. So you can have them practice the patterns they're going to see in the book. I don't think you need to start the reading with a choral read necessarily. I think it's beneficial for students to work through the book on their own, maybe staggered if you're meeting at a table or with a partner at desks, but I don't recommend jumping right into it without reviewing the pattern that you've taught. Mistake number 5 is not using decodable books to their full potential. Decodable texts are often taught as pure decoding practice. Get through the words, check the box, and move on, but there's so much more that we can do with them. Let's start with vocabulary. How about CVC words? Some of those words are actually unfamiliar to our students. They're not exactly sure what they mean. A word like bin or lug or vat or rut. Those are all CVC words that might be present in books that students don't really know what they mean. Teach those meanings and use pictures to help. There's also lots of CVC words with multiple meanings. Teach the multiple meanings of those words. If the book features the word jam, sure, you can teach your students about jam on a sandwich, but you can also talk to them about what it means to jam something into a suitcase. Use the book to build comprehension. Ask students higher level questions that require them to make inferences. And this is where those pictures can come in really handy with the really simple books. Have them put the events of the story in order. Have them retell the story to a partner. And finally, give students plenty of time to reread the text to automaticity till they're really good at it. That's how fluency develops, because fluency is built on automaticity, accuracy with phonics patterns. And decodable texts are a great way to give students practice with these simple patterns so they can map them through this process called orthographic mapping, which only happens when we get lots of repeated practice decoding the words. I recommend giving your students fluency folders, which would look different depending where they are in their phonics journey. In our membership, we have lots of resources that teachers can use to help students build automaticity with particular phonics patterns. And mistake number 6 is something I teased about in a previous video, and that is keeping students in decodable text for too long. Decodable texts are a tool, not a destination. Some people talk of them as if they are training wheels. So there's something we use until we don't need them anymore. We don't want to use them for too long. Once students are reading words by attending to the phonics patterns, not guessing or using the picture to help, they might be ready to try text that is less decodable. Staying in highly decodable text too long has its own costs. And knowing when to move on is just as important as knowing when to start. It's different for every student. If you want to learn more about this, you can check out my blog post about when students should move out of decodable text. You can also check out my book where I discuss it as well. The question worth sitting with is this: are my students getting the most out of this decodable text? Because with a few intentional shifts, the answer can be yes. If you want to go deeper on phonics instruction, you're invited to my Invigorate Your Phonics Instruction Challenge. Over 5 days, you'll get quick, actionable videos, a daily challenge with personal feedback from me, and bonus printables to support you along the way. Thank you so much for watching. You can find the link to that challenge below this video, and I'll talk to you next time.